All right, let's talk about watercolors. We're going to talk about the right way to use them and some techniques for being successful with watercolors. So first off, here is a watercolor set. Pretty new, almost brand new. And the way you open them is you just push and lift. You gotta push with your thumb and lift it. And this one's got lots of paint. And actually these little ovals right here are the pigments. So pigment gets mixed with water to make the paint. Another important part of the watercolors is the lid. And this is not just a lid to keep the watercolors safe, it's actually designed to be a place to mix your paints with the water. So other things you're gonna need, it's really helpful to have a paper towel. So just a little bit of paper towel, just one little section to start with. And watercolor brushes. You can't use just any old brush for watercolor. Although most of the brushes that I have in the art room are watercolor brushes. These with the blue and yellow handle are the ones that came with the kit, and they are really nice watercolor brushes for the price. These will also work for watercolor, the really long handle ones, as well as these big square brushes, but these are a little different. You got to use these a special way. These two are good ones just to start out with. A watercolor brush is going to be a little softer on the tip. All right, so the other thing you're going to need with your watercolors is, of course, water. And you really don't need a whole lot. I only filled this up about a third of the way. You don't have to fill it up to the top. That's an easy way to spill. So just about a third of the way up is fine. And sharing is awesome, but when you're watercoloring, I want everybody to have their own water and their own tray. And that's because you need to have your water real close, because if you're gonna paint, you need to be able to reach it really easily. So if I'm gonna get a color ready to paint with, I'm gonna dip my brush in the water, and then I just gently touch the color I wanna use and bring the pigment over to the lid. And I really want you to make sure that you're not scooping big gobs of the pigment out of the tray. Most of the time, that just does a lot of harm to the pigment, and it's more than you can actually use. So just gently touch the pigment, bring it over to the lid. Don't skip this step. Make sure that you get a nice puddle of color right here in the lid. Now I've got orange, and let's say I know that I also want to use some purple with that orange. So then I'm going to wash my brush, and I'll scrape it on the edge to get the extra water out. Please don't tap it, because if you tap it, you end up splashing paint onto your neighbor's artwork or your own artwork. So just dunk it and scrape it. And now I'm going to get some purple ready to paint with, just like I did the orange. And the key to watercolor is getting just the right amount of water and pigment. You don't want it to be too dry, but you also don't want it to be too watery. Think of it like mixing up Kool-Aid or the powder lemonade. You don't want it to be too sour, but you also don't want it to be too bland with too much water. So just the right amount. Okay. Now we're ready to paint. So another important thing is having nice watercolor paper. At home, you can definitely get a pack of really nice watercolor paper, but we normally use the cardstock, and that stuff works great for watercoloring for most of the time in our class. But you definitely don't want to use like copy paper or the sketch paper. That stuff will fall apart when it gets wet. So now I'm going to get my brush with some paint on it, not the pigment, just the paint, which I've already mixed with the water. And the cool thing about these brushes is you can use them so many different ways. That's why I like these watercolor kits because they come with great brushes. And you can use them to make a nice skinny line. That's using just the tip of the brush. You can push just a little bit harder and tilt your brush a little more and get a nice broad line. That's good for coloring. All right, but one thing you never want to see is this spiky Bart Simpson hairdo. That means you're pushing too hard and it's not gonna help your watercolor at all. It's actually gonna hurt the brush. So make sure that you're always using just the end of the brush. And if you start to get to a point where it starts to look a little dry, like this last brush stroke I did, you can keep painting and painting and painting, and maybe you get more color out of it. But instead of doing that, dip your brush again, reload it. Because you have to load your brush to be able to paint. And that's why it's a good idea to have your paint real close by so that you're not reaching really far every time that you need more paint. Okay? I know that with crayons and colored pencils, if you need more color out of it, you push a little harder and the color gets darker or more intense. It's not the case with paintbrushes. There's only so much paint that the hairs can hold. When that's out, you just gotta put more on there. All right, now I'm gonna wash my brush, scrape it on the edge, wash it, scrape it, and I am ready for some orange. Same idea. All right, but I have some other brushes. This brush works really similar to the way that this one does. This one is good for painting really big areas, but I don't want these brushes to touch the pigment. So if you already have some paint mixed up, you can use it. Okay? But this could really easily ruin the pigment. So make sure that you mix it in the lid before you use this big brush. This one, you really gotta have a specific need for it, or else you probably don't even wanna have it at your table. But it can come in handy. All right, so now let's talk about some other things. A lot of times when you are watercoloring, you have a drawing that you're adding color to, and you may want to make sure that that drawing stands out. So a good thing to do is, if you have a pencil drawing, you may want to trace it with a black colored pencil, which is actually my favorite technique. Or you can use a Sharpie pen. So the really thin felt tip Sharpies. And that can help your drawing stand out even through the watercolor paint. Okay, so now let's say that we're done with our artwork. The next thing you need to do, and you might actually need to do this the first thing, if you got a tray that is a little dirty on top, you may take it to your seat and be like, ooh, I need to clean this before I use it. But all you do is take your brush, get it wet, get those paints wet, then take your paper towel, wad it up in a ball, and just dry up those paints. You never need to get a wet paper towel, just a dry one. And that is pretty clean. Okay? If you see that your pigments are mixed up, that is something I want you to tell me about, and I will try to clean it up for you because that's a little trickier. All right, so now I think you're ready for watercolor.